Welcome to Moments That Matter, a podcast that looks at the moments in our lives that come along from time to time that have consequences long after the moment, especially those moments that have to do with the choice of vocation. In his book, Let Your Life Speak, Listening for the Voice of Vocation, Parker Palmer speaks of a clearness committee in the Quaker tradition, wherein a group of older, wiser people ask questions of someone considering a life choice, as a way of clarifying the next step. We may not meet with a committee about these big decisions, but we all have these critical junctures in our lives which we can think of as clearness committee moments. We need to pay attention to these moments because they are profound and potentially life-altering. We will relay stories from our lives and interview others about theirs, especially noting the clearness committee moments, those we chose to recognize and those that were sadly ignored, those decisions that were made with God in mind and those that were not. Our hope is that these podcasts will cause you to think of the same kind of moments in your life with new clarity.
Welcome back. Jason and Amanda Shive are good friends of mine, and Amanda is joining us today. Amanda graduated from Southern Wesleyan University 8 years ago, which I can hardly imagine, though I actually taught her in my very first semester here. So I've known her for over 10 years. Wow. Amazing. She lived for a year in China after graduation, returned to the States, and had a quite unexpected whirlwind romance with Jason, who is a childhood friend. They got married and returned to China as teachers in Wuhan, the epicenter of the coronavirus outbreak that's all over the news right now. They returned to the States a couple of years ago, and now they've joined us. They are both working in North Carolina. And what we wanted to talk about was their lives. We wanted to talk a bit about how they got to China, and we'll kind of start with Amanda's story, and living in China. And now that they're back, kind of their concerns that they have for friends who are still in Wuhan, and their plans to return to China at some point in the future. So, thanks for joining. So, Amanda, yours is a very unique story, and I'd love hours to talk to you about it, but unfortunately we have only about 30 minutes. Can you tell us a bit about how you came to know you were supposed to be in China?
Yeah, I actually listened to your podcast from, I think you just posted it, of like the call that you had. So yeah, I'm excited to get to share my call after your call. But so I was called to China during my time at SWU. I was working at a summer camp called Snowbird Wilderness Outfitters, and I was just learning a lot. I never really known anyone who had been a missionary or been sent out from a church that I'd been to. So missions was just a whole new, really neat, adventurous thing to me. But that didn't mean I wanted to do it. I was still planning on moving back to my hometown, and, but that was cool for those other people that were called to do it. But in the summer of 2009, I was working at Snowbird, and I was praying one night up in this prayer chapel, and all of a sudden, God just gave me a supernatural love for China and for the Chinese people. It's like, where did this come from? It's kind of like I fell in love with China, but not one of those infatuation loves that you get as a teenager, like, oh, he's amazing. No, it was this true love that God gave me for China and the Chinese people. And so but I didn't know any Chinese people, all I knew was the people down at the Chinese restaurant down the road. And so I just started doing research about China, and that was it. I was in love. And so I ended up about 2 years later, I spent a month between my junior and senior year at SWU. I spent a month in Kunming, which is in southwest China, right above Laos and Vietnam. And I taught some English and did some other stuff there, built relationships. And then after I came back from that, I finished my time at SWU. Then I ended up spending a year in Kunming studying Mandarin and building relationships and doing everything that I was called to do. So yeah, it was a whirlwind. And actually my husband, the year before I was called to China, we were just the best of friends at this time. God gave him a call to China. And I said one day, man, I want to love like that. Like I want a call like that. And then boom, a year later, I got it. And then boom, 6 years later, we're married.
Yes, that is your life, actually. Boom. Yeah, and for the uninitiated who are listening, cool people call Southern Wesleyan University SWU.
Oh, excuse me.
People should be educated. It's cool.
Okay.
Okay, and I should also throw into your story that after I taught you that very first semester, we didn't have a lot of contact until your senior year, right? And so there was a group getting ready to go to China, and the leader asked me to come and talk to them about spiritual warfare. And I was walking out, and Amanda was walking right behind me, and she said, "Can I talk to you about just kind of being on the mission field, kind of what does it mean, and everything that's involved in it and everything else like that." So that's when we got kind of reconnected, and also somewhere in all of that that you were talking about, you also went to Mozambique. So you've had some great experiences. So back to Wuhan just for a second, if we could kind of focus on that, because again, that's in the news. Wuhan, for those that don't know, even though you've probably heard the name on the news, is in the interior of eastern China, and it's the capital of Hubei province. Mm-hmm. The population of that province is 60 million, which is about 20% of the population of the United States. And Wuhan itself has a population of about 10 or 11 million, which is pretty much bigger than any city in the United States. And I remember you saying that one of the things you had to get used to was just the scale of everything. I mean, just this, how big, even like a quote, small town would be bigger than most of our cities in the States.
Yeah.
So that makes it, because it's in Eastern China, it's kind of this hub, it's crossroads, everything else like that. So it's kind of, in a sense, the worst case scenario for the outbreak of this virus. It's been estimated, I don't know if you know this, Amanda, it's been estimated that between the time that the virus, was cited for the very first time and identified, and the quarantine went into place, there were something like 5 million people who had visited Wuhan who then left Wuhan. Wow. So, and literally all over the world. And so you can imagine, this was going to keep on showing up and showing up and showing up in the world. So, as I mentioned, the city is on quarantine, and it's been tough to get out, but some have. And I know you've got friends who are there and who have been able to leave, but also some, I would imagine, who have not been able to leave. Can you talk a little bit about their stories?
Sure. I might get a little teary talking about it.
Okay.
Well, so we were in Wuhan for 3.5 years teaching at an international school. So, there's lots of people that come in for 2 years and then leave, or come in for 4 years and leave, but we still have lots of connections there just from our 3.5 years there. And so we were working at an international school. So this actually, all the quarantine happened about midway through their spring festival break. So a lot of people from the school had already left. They'd flown to Thailand or Europe or, gallivanting around the earth, as, expats do. So there's a lot of people who are stuck outside the country, which is probably the best case scenario for, a lot of the people that we know. So there's a good amount of teachers stuck outside the country that are returning to their homes because they don't know how long the quarantine will last. They literally cannot fly back into their hometown. And wow. There's actually some students and some teachers who are on a service trip to Laos from our school. And so these are just, a bunch of high schoolers and a handful of teachers that are stuck in Laos. So they're getting flown back to there's one kid that's from Singapore who he's going to be flown back to Singapore. And there's another one from the Philippines that I think his dad's going to go and pick him up. And there's a family that's originally from the Philippines where the dad was in the Philippines. The wife and daughters are in Wuhan and the son is in Laos. And then there's so many people who are actually stuck in Wuhan, because this wasn't, there's people who say, well, why didn't they leave before? Why didn't they get out sooner? The quarantine happened overnight. People woke up and it was shut down. Like everything was shut down. They didn't really have like a warning of, hey, in 3 days we're closing down public transportation. We're closing down the city. They didn't have that. It was just boom. Don't leave your house unless you have to. You have to wear a mask, but stay in your house. That's the best thing to do. And so we have a lot of friends who are in the city, and it's funny that I haven't been able to get in contact with my Chinese friends, but it's funny that the expats, there's kind of this like divided line of like half of them are, no, this is our home. We're going to stay here. And then the other half are like, get me out of here. And it's even funny that some people who are on the side of, we're going to stay here, but then as it progressed and as they were in their home longer and it seems to be getting worse, they're like, oh no, we want to go back to that side and join them. So we've had a few families from our school who were able to get evacuated, 2 American families, and one family that the wife is Canadian and the husband is British. And so if you've seen any BBC news things on the internet, that family has having her second child, and they have a 2-year-old. But as it's progressed, the hospitals are full. They're turning away people. So it's the scary part of, well, are we going to be able to have our baby in a safe place, or are we going to have a baby in our home? And so the husband started reaching out to Canada and the UK, and they said, whoever takes us out of here, like, that's where we're going to have our baby. And so it was kind of a race to, okay, we're going to have a Canadian baby or a British baby. Right.
So are they in Canada now?
No, they got evacuated to the UK.
Okay, all right.
So the UK was the first one to come through, so that's where they went.
And are they quarantined as far as you know?
They are. They're going to be quarantined for 2 weeks. I think they just landed today or yesterday in the UK. And so they're going to be quarantined for 2 weeks. And then we also have other friends who we've been FaceTiming and talking with, some of our dearest friends that were coming from Wuhan to America. And they're also in quarantine in California. They're on an Air Force base. We were asking them today, like, well, what's your living situations? And they showed us around their little dorm-sized room I don't know if it's an Air Force base. Let's just say military base. I don't know what kind of base it is, to be honest with you. But they said that there's a few different places they can go inside the base. And like, there's one grassy area where they've just been sitting outside and getting sunburnt, but they're so glad they're there getting sunburnt and not locked up in their house in Wuhan. And there's a restaurant that's like, we said, well, what about food? And there's a restaurant like catering in food to them. And when we talked to them the first day they landed, and within a few hours they FaceTimed us, and we just said, well, how are y'all doing? They said, we need counseling. And we were like, well, why? Like, tell us more. And just the stress of being in the city and being kind of trapped. The public transportation was shut down. It's still shut down. So if you don't have a scooter or a car, and I don't even think you're supposed to be driving, you're really trapped. Just them getting from their apartment to the airport was a miracle because of all the road closures and the bridges shut down.
Wow. And still, I have also heard stories of people who are still in Wuhan who, they can go to the grocery store and there's stuff to buy, and so in one way it's a ghost town, and in another way it's functioning somehow, which is kind of interesting.
I've read like a diary today from a Chinese person in Wuhan, and they were talking about the rice and the noodles were all running low, but I think what's still open is the hospitals, the supermarkets, and the drugstores. I'm pretty sure those are the things that are still going.
So as far as you know, none of your friends or acquaintances have actually been affected by the virus itself. It's just the quarantine and that sort of thing.
Right. Yeah. No, I don't know anyone who who has the coronavirus now.
Okay. Yeah, because as of yesterday, there were something like 170 deaths in Hubei, and there were over 6,000 cases, that had been, people had been hospitalized or quarantined or whatever it might be. But they still say that it may not be as bad as some of the outbreaks that have been in the past recently, that have just, tore through the population. So, kind of what's your, I don't know, what's your status as far as China is concerned? First of all, just kind of seeing all this now and having sort of Wuhan on overdrive, that you're getting all this news from where you used to live. And then also just thinking about the future and, what do you foresee happening in the future?
Well, my husband and I have just been heartbroken, like seeing our friends that are stuck, and we even have friends that they're due to have a baby in 2 weeks, and she wasn't able to get on the flight to America, and it could have been because she's due in 2 weeks, but it's really sad that this is happening, and that this is the coverage that people are hearing about Wuhan. Before this happened, no one knew where Wuhan was, even though it's this ginormous city of 11 million people.
Yeah, nobody
knew Wuhan. But Wuhan's a beautiful city with incredible people and delicious food. And, my husband and I were even talking of taking a trip back in April. Like we were this close to buying a ticket to Wuhan in April, and something happened and we were like, oh, we need to save that money and not do that. And a week later, the coronavirus hit the news. And so we love Wuhan. We will always feel like that was like kind of our first home as a family. But we don't have any plans going back. My husband wanted to sign another contract, but then we really felt we were supposed to come back to our hometown, and this is where we're supposed to be for right now. So yeah, we're happy to be where we're at. We don't have any plans for the future. We're not afraid to go back to China. I mean, we don't plan to go there right now, or anytime soon. But yeah, we're not afraid of China or the Chinese people, or no.
Are you able to use your language skills? If our listeners don't know, and I'm sure they don't, Amanda is fluent, and so she was able to make a lot of friends over in China, which is kind of awesome. Are you able to use your language?
Well, I wouldn't call myself fluent. I'll call myself conversational. But the place I've been able to use my language the most is I'm actually teaching a homeschool co-op Chinese class. So that's where I'm using it the most. It's just beginners level Chinese. It's nothing big, but I use it sometimes at the Chinese grocery store, and they are very impressed.
For sure. No, when you were, still here, and we would go to restaurants sometimes with people, and it was just hilarious because you being just, blonde and American, and, and then you're ordering from the Chinese menu, and everybody was just like, yeah, look at that. So yeah, pretty awesome. So the point of this podcast, at least partially, is kind of talking about these clearance committee moments that happen for us. Clearance committees being like a Quaker tradition of the older, wiser folks who kind of encircle someone making a life decision and ask them questions about that decision to help kind of clarify their direction. And so I maintain that we have these moments in our lives, whether or not we have a committee. And so would you say that kind of happened for you in that summer camp that you were talking about?
No. Well, it was kind of an immediate call for me. I didn't really go out searching for more people to tell me like, yeah, you should go to China. Although I did have lots of mentors and people who discipled me who encouraged me in that. But yeah, it was a pretty immediate thing. But the Lord has definitely given me over the years many people just like you that could speak into the calling and encourage that. And yeah, so thanks for that, Dr. Scott.
Sure, absolutely. Did anybody, and you don't have to name names, but that's fine. Did anybody discourage you?
Absolutely.
Yeah, because I've shared that, that's part of my story for sure. Especially the closest friends and family. That tend to be where the discouragement came from.
Yeah. Any cross-cultural worker that doesn't get discouraged by someone that would be silly. They probably all have been there and done that.
There's this moment when you know that you're supposed to go to China. What's the moment that you know that you're supposed to come back from China?
Whenever I knew that we were supposed to come back, and I mean, we love China. We love the people. We love the culture. We love it. It wasn't an easy, like, oh, we hate this place, we're just going to leave. It was, God really had to call us back. And so my husband watched the kids because I was staying at home with the kids at this time. He watched the kids so I could go to a Good Friday prayer meeting at our school. And so I went to the Good Friday prayer meeting, and they sent us off in our own directions to just have 30 minutes to an hour just to hear from the Lord. And I felt the Lord tell me to go to Jeremiah 29. And, everybody goes to Jeremiah 29:11. I know the plans I have for you. Well, that's not where he sent me. He told me to read the whole chapter. So I started, and it's about the Israelites being exiled to Babylon. And we kind of felt like we were being exiled back to America. But in chapter, or in 29:5, it says to build a house and plant a garden and pretty much dig your roots in where you're going. And that was the moment that we knew we were supposed to come back to our hometown, or I knew, and I passed that on to my husband. But we were supposed to come back to our hometown, and we were supposed to really dig roots in. But God didn't leave them in Babylon. He would bring them back to the promised land. And so we didn't build a house, we bought a house. And we did plant a garden. It didn't go very well. Jason he works for Cabarrus County FCA. So he's in the school going, and sharing the gospel with so many different teenagers on a weekly basis. And he's the associate pastor at our church. And so we really dug in here. Yeah, we're building the community God called us to.
Was it a difficult transition back?
It wasn't terrible. I think it would have been more difficult if we were just going off of like feelings and like, oh, we don't like China anymore, we want to go back. But we felt it was another call. It was another one of those times of like, boom, this is what you're supposed to do. That's kind of how God does with me. He just hits me, boom. And all right, that's what we're doing. So we felt purpose in coming back. Having the purpose, that's important.
Yeah, I tell people that, you can't just be called from something, you have to be called to something.
That's right.
Well, and another unique aspect of kind of what you've experienced is that you have been overseas as a single person, and you've also been overseas as a married person and married with children. So how would you compare being single to being married and with family? Both times in China.
Well, my husband and I were talking about this the other day, and so he knows whenever I say being single overseas was a lot easier than with being married and having children. It really got more difficult with the farther steps in life. So being single, I was able to go out and build all these relationships, and, at a drop of a hat, I could go out for coffee with a friend. And so that was pretty easy. And learning language was easy because I didn't have anything else to do at night but study characters. And, that was a piece of cake. But when I went back married, there was this new, now Jason is my number one ministry. This is who I'm spending a lot of time with, and we're speaking English. And so it was kind of more difficult for him to learn Chinese because I came in knowing it, and he had to start learning it. And then when we added kids, oh man, like obviously we adore our kids, but it just adds a whole new level of responsibility and time management. And but
And
we love it.
So were you speaking like English at home with kids and then Chinese outside the home?
Right. Mm-hmm.
Okay. So how did that compare, to your single experience with the language? Did you feel kind of hampered in some ways?
Yeah, I definitely probably had more one-on-one time with Chinese whenever I was there single, just because I had more time. And being a stay-at-home mom, my kids became, this is who I needed to be pouring into. Like Jason was out of the house more, but I was with the kids. And but when I was single, my language learning improved a lot.
Yeah, I remember when you were here and you took the Chinese lessons, right? I mean, we had that at that point. And then you started visiting the Chinese restaurant, and you just started making friends with these, especially in Clemson. There was something that you were doing at Clemson, wasn't there?
Mm-hmm. The Presbyterian Church had a ESL class. That's where I made a lot of my international friends.
Yes.
Oh, and they still have it, a Chinese church in downtown Clemson.
And so I just remember your language skills just going zoom. I mean, just like you just took off in senior year. That was amazing. Very impressive. For those of us who are not so inclined with the language, it was very impressive to watch. So I don't know. Do you have anything else that you wanted to tell us? Any experiences you wanted to relate, or people you wanted to talk about, or anything like that?
I think the thing that has irked me the most with the coronavirus and social media and stuff has been that people are seeing Wuhan and seeing the virus. They're not able to see the people that are not sick there, that are, all these people who are saying terrible things about they should take their sick butts back to Wuhan. They shouldn't be evacuating people. And, 10,000, that's a lot of people. I think that's the latest number that I've heard on the number of people who are sick. That is a lot of people, but that is such a tiny fraction of 11 million people.
Yeah.
And to be, even in China and even in Hubei province, I've heard that people who are from Wuhan are being just ridiculed by their family because they're from the epicenter. It's ridiculous. It's kind of like virusism or something, it's not racism. It's just but it's just ridiculous that so many people are being judged by something they have absolutely no control over, when we really should be concerned and praying for the people who are there, even the medical, the government, the coronavirus currently isn't impacting us, or many people in America. I think there've been five cases in America. But I just want people to be able to see and have compassion on the people in Wuhan, because, and I pray that Wuhan isn't forever known as the virus city, that people are really able to see how beautiful it is and the people are. And it helps to have perspective of these are real people.
Yeah. And I can identify with that, with Ukraine. Because pretty much any news that you would ever hear here in the States about Ukraine was bad news. It was just inevitably. And now, of course, Ukraine is in the middle of the impeachment thing. And here's the Secretary of State saying, does America care about Ukraine? And it's just, well, these are people. How can you not care about these people? And, in the case of China, who are, battling this virus, in some cases dying, and in the case of Ukraine, we're at war, and over 16,000 people have died, in that war in 6 years, and how can you not care? I don't understand. But that's unfortunately kind of part of, I think, the media in general. If it's not about America, it's nobody cares. And further, in some cases, it's considered a threat, and so it's even worse than nothing. So yeah, I mean, I really hear you, and I feel what you're feeling. Well, I think that's about our time. So thank you so much for your willingness to talk with us about Wuhan and other things. I just hope that those listening know that in my case with Ukraine and Amanda's case with China, I mean, we're just people, and God just uses people. That's all it is. We're nothing special, and so we have the same kind of stresses and anxieties, and we don't know everything, and it's not always easy, and then eventually we have to come back, and then it's like, well, what was that about? So yeah, I just want to encourage anyone who's listening, who is thinking about going overseas, just listen. And just
do it.
And just do it. And just say yes. Absolutely. The answer is yes. Thank you, Amanda.
Thank you so much for having me. Let me share about Wuhan and my people.